The soldier took a deep breath, plunged into the water, and used a tree stump for cover. He let the current carry him slowly toward the German wooden bridge. His mission clear: blow it up. The Germans on the bridge spotted the floating stump, spat at it with disdain, and paid it no further mind. Exactly what he'd hoped for. He slipped under the bridge undetected, pulled the explosives from his pack, and fastened them to the load-bearing pillars. But just as he finished, the Germans, noticing the stump hadn't drifted past, leaned over the rail to peer into the water. The soldier ducked beneath the stump, letting the current carry him downstream. The Germans, still wary, fired a few shots at the stump before losing interest. Once out of sight, he surfaced, gasping for air, and winced. A bullet had grazed his arm. Worse, he saw the bomb's fuse had been severed by a stray shot. With the Katyusha rocket launcher about to cross the bridge on its way to Berlin, he had no choice. He dived again, swimming to the bridge's base. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he fumbled to reconnect the fuse, but his blood stained the water red, catching the eye of a German guard on the bank. Knowing time was up, he detonated the explosives, sacrificing himself to destroy the bridge. But the mission wasn't over. The Katyusha still needed to be retrieved. The Germans, their transport plan derailed, hid the rocket launcher in a barn borrowed from a nearby farmhouse. The remaining soldiers snuck up to the barn, their sharpshooter loosed an arrow, silently taking out the guard. They found the Katyusha, but when they tried to start the truck, it sputtered and died. Its loud coughing drew a squad of Germans. A fierce gunfight erupted. Outnumbered, the two soldiers couldn't hold them off, and were hit. To buy time for his comrade, one soldier pulled the pin on a grenade, choosing to take the Germans down with him.
The soldier strained to lift a 60-kilogram log, but weeks of near starvation had sapped his strength. He could barely hoist it with every ounce of effort. A nearby Japanese officer ordered his men, if the soldier dared drop the log, he'd be shot on the spot. The soldier's legs wobbled, yet he refused to let go. It wasn't fear of death that held him up, but a fierce resolve to cling to his trampled dignity. As time dragged on, he clung to the log by sheer willpower. His fellow prisoners watched in awe, their admiration plain. The Japanese officer's expression shifted too, from cold arrogance to open astonishment. At that moment, all the POWs paused their work, murmuring encouragement. The soldier knew, deep down, he wasn't just representing himself anymore. He stood for his nation, his people. He fixed the officer with a steady, unflinching gaze, silently vowing to survive. Living, he thought, would be the greatest blow to the enemy. Summoning his last reserves of strength, he lifted the log a little higher. A sudden burst of vitality that seemed to unnerve the officer. Enraged, the officer knocked the soldier to the ground, but he couldn't bring himself to meet the man's eyes. The soldier, ready to die, stared up at the officer, unblinking, even as blows rained down. Eventually, the officer collapsed to his knees, sobbing. He couldn't defeat a single prisoner, let alone a nation. Not long after, Japan announced its surrender. The prisoners erupted in cheers, tears of joy streaming down their faces. They were finally free of that hellish camp. No words could capture their relief, their elation. The soldier returned to the United States soon after. He dropped to his knees, kissing the soil, then embraced his long-missed family, home at last.
The soldier was carefully defusing a mine when he suddenly doubled over, retching uncontrollably. A comrade rushed to help, but the sudden movement of his retching jostled the device, and in an instant, the mine detonated. The soldier's limbs were shredded by the blast. He writhed in agony, sobbing, "Take me home." His teammates stared, frozen. Tens of thousands of mines still lay buried in the sand, and no one knew who might be next. Even the stoic captain looked shaken. He injected the boy with a sedative, then watched as a vehicle carried him away. Back at the barracks, the remaining boys doubled over, clutching their stomachs in excruciating pain. Helmet, one of the soldiers, confessed to the captain, driven by hunger, he'd stolen horse feed from a nearby farm the night before and shared it, and now they were all suffering from food poisoning. The captain stormed to the farm, pointing to the manger. The farmer's wife smirked, venom in her voice. "That feed's laced with rat droppings. At best, it makes you sick. At worst, it kills." Clearly, she loathed the Germans, and had set the trap, knowing the starving boys would steal. After identifying the poison, the captain ordered Sergeant Schumann to fetch seawater from the beach. The boys were forced to drink it, inducing violent vomiting, then scrubbed clean to flush the toxins. It was a brutal remedy, but it barely saved their lives. The next day, the captain drove to the military hospital to check on Wilhelm, only to learn the boy had died. Overcome with guilt, he smuggled a crate of food back to the barracks, though the lieutenant spotted him. The captain tossed loaves of bread toward the door, and the boys descended, eating ravenously. They hadn't had proper food in days. Later, the captain addressed them, lying to preserve morale. Wilhelm's been treated and sent home to Germany. The boys smiled, relieved. But we're short-handed now, he went on. Each of you must defuse 8 mines an hour. Thanks to Schumann's improvised tool, they cleared a truckload of mines that afternoon, daring to hope again, for normal lives, for the promise of going home once the beach was safe. But they underestimated Danish hatred. That night, the lieutenant sent soldiers to brutalize the boys. The captain intervened just in time. The lieutenant's message was clear: no compassion for Germans. The captain lied, claiming he needed the boys' expertise to finish the job quickly, barely diffusing the conflict. The next day, Schumann spotted a booby-trap mine, designed specifically to kill engineers. "These are linked," he shouted. "Removing one fuse could detonate the other." But Werner, deafened by the wind, hadn't heard. He held up the defused mine, grinning, and the explosion tore him apart, his remains scattered in the sand. His brother screamed, but there was nothing left to save. Another boy, gone without a trace. Grief hung thick over the beach. A sedative calmed the hysterical brother, but the captain felt a strange, heavy weight. He confessed to Schumann. "Wilhelm didn't survive." Schumann nodded. He'd known all along. "The hope of going home is the only thing keeping them alive," he said. After that, the captain stopped locking the boys up and began sneaking food from the camp. When the first safe zone was cleared, they kicked a football on the sand, briefly tasting freedom, until a blast killed the captain's dog. Convinced the boys had been careless, he unleashed his rage on the inventory officer.
Hol den Ball! Wie ein Hund! Mit dem Mund!
The man had just opened his eyes when a pistol pressed against his cheek. Instantly terrified, he begged the general for mercy. "I have plenty of money. I can pay to save my life," he stammered. At the word, money, the general agreed to spare him. The man slowly opened his safe, slipping $10,000 into his pocket when the rebels weren't looking. As he reached for more, he noticed the rebels staring, and in his panic, he grabbed a key by mistake. He approached the general, trembling, but when the general saw he held no money, he slapped him hard. "Where's my money?" he roared. "I told you to bring me money." Moments later, the general dragged him to his wife, pressed a pistol into his hand, and ordered him to kill his wife and children. The man couldn't even lift his arm, so he quickly pulled out the hidden $10,000, managing to save his family. After shoving his wife into a car, he kept handing over money to the general. He wanted to save all the refugees too. He gathered the refugees' money and handed it all over. But the greedy general scoffed. "This isn't enough. You'll need more to save so many." With no other choice, the man raced back to his hotel, grabbed every last cent he had, and rushed back. The general, surprisingly, kept his word. He told his men to release the prisoners. But it wasn't long before the cunning rebels doubled back, still intent on killing everyone. The man begged the general for 15 minutes. Claiming he had more money stashed away. The general agreed. He rushed to call his boss, explaining the rebels had seized the hotel, and 1,000 refugees were trapped inside. Faced with so many innocent lives, his boss struggled briefly, then used his connections to defuse the crisis. When the man stepped out of the hotel, the general was already pacing, snapping, "Hurry up and get the people out." The man had no choice but to stall for time.
Who did you call? Who did I call? Don't lie to me!
Thanks to that single call, though, everyone was eventually rescued. But in the days that followed, survival would depend on themselves. The man told the group, "If anyone knows a dignitary, call them now. It might be our only chance." Days passed with no help, and food ran scarce. To scrape together supplies, the man sought out the general again, offering money to buy food. The general took the cash, then said, "You don't have to coddle these refugees so much. Half are already dead. Soon the rest will be too." But the man's kindness wouldn't waver. The general, seeing his resolve, let him go. They hadn't driven far when the road grew bumpy. The man got out to check, and froze. The road was littered with refugees' bodies. There was no way forward. Back at the hotel, he was heartbroken but refused to give up. He tracked down a TV reporter, urging them to air footage of the rebels killing refugees, hoping public outrage would force a ceasefire. After his relentless efforts, good news finally came.
The men set up their anti-aircraft guns, ready to shoot down the planes overhead, but when the German fighter planes spotted them, they immediately veered off, circling above the submarine. They were waiting for the submarine to dive before delivering a fatal strike. At this point, the soldiers deliberately exposed a small breach, pretending to prepare for a dive, a trick to lure the German pilots into attacking. The submarine began sinking rapidly, but not fast enough to outpace the fighters. Just as a pilot was about to press the launch button, a soldier suddenly emerged from the submarine's deck. firing a shot that took down the ace pilot instantly, but the crisis had barely eased when radar detected another enemy submarine nearby. The captain immediately ordered the engines shut down, enforcing absolute silence. All crew members held their breath until the sonar operator accidentally flipped on the record player. The sudden sound made everyone jump, followed by a melodic song that echoed through the sea. Knowing they'd been exposed, the captain ordered a hasty retreat, while instructing his men to load torpedoes for a counterattack. But as they worked, the chain carrying the torpedo snapped. The 10-ton warhead crashed onto a crew member, his agonized screams loud enough for the enemy submarine to hear. Thankfully, the soldiers managed to free the torpedo from the man's body, then rushed to load it into the launch tube. At the captain's command, the torpedo streaked toward the enemy, but radar blared again. The Germans had launched a torpedo too, and it was closing in fast. There was no time to turn. By some miracle, the enemy torpedo grazed their hull. The scraping sound nearly deafened the crew. Seconds later, their torpedo struck the German submarine, tearing it apart on impact. But the blast was so close that their own submarine suffered severe damage. Inside, men struggled to stay upright as water began pouring through leaks. They had no choice but to surface, only to find German destroyers waiting, their guns already aimed at them. This Russian general, lured by $2 billion, led his men in smuggling 10 nuclear warheads. Once the warheads were loaded, the nuclear train inched away from the nuclear base, then hurtled toward Chechnya. The soldiers napping on the train had no clue their wide-awake commander had betrayed them. Another train pulled alongside on parallel tracks. The men in black inside flipped on their night vision goggles. When the two trains aligned perfectly, they sprang onto the nuclear warhead transport train in a flash. The guarding soldiers, oblivious to the threat, were quickly overpowered by the black-clad intruders. They cut the train's internal power supply, plunging the carriages into darkness as the Russian commander slipped out, waiting for the pre-planned slaughter to unfold. The soldiers still slumbered when the black-clad men burst in, assault rifles raised, infrared sights locked on the sleeping figures, unleashing a ruthless hail of gunfire. A sudden jolt shook the train, rousing the soldiers, but it was too late. The Russian general arrived soon after, clapped the commander on the shoulder, and praised his excellent work. Staring at his former comrades lying motionless on the ground, the commander stood rigid, unable to steady his nerves. The general calmly keyed in the password to unlock the nuclear compartment, collaborating with the black-clad men to steal 9 warheads. He deliberately left one behind on the original train, setting it to detonate in 10 minutes, a deliberate nuclear disaster. To throw off official investigations, the men in black then forced the train onto a diverted track, completing the heist before vanishing into a mountain tunnel to escape the impending blast. But the Russian commander, overcome with panic, kept fretting about being caught, so the general shot him dead on the spot. Meanwhile, a passenger train approached the soon-to-explode nuclear train. The driver spotted the danger in horror, slamming on the emergency brakes, sparks flying, then leapt from the train and fled. The two trains collided with a thunderous crash, rousing a couple sleeping by the roadside. They rushed out to check, but the trains had already crumpled into twisted scrap metal. The nuclear bomb's countdown ticked down to 28 seconds. Before the couple could take more than a few steps, the explosion erupted, incinerating everything in its path. The woman suddenly realized she seemed to have stepped on something odd. She grabbed a knife and pried the wooden plank loose, then pulled out her phone, flipped on the camera, and slipped it into the gap she just created. To her shock, there was something wriggling inside. She stood up, yanked a leg off the table, and tensed, ready for whatever came next. Graves was an intelligence agent. One day, she returned home to find the place in disarray, her husband's shattered glasses lying on the floor. Graves cautiously grabbed a dinner knife. The next second, the phone on the table rang. She answered to find it was the kidnappers. They'd taken her husband and threatened that only by handing over the documents hidden in a prisoner's false tooth, held in the agency's secret prison, would he be spared. But Graves was an agent of the intelligence agency, and complying would clearly mean betraying her organization. Yet without hesitation, she headed to the secret prison and found the warden, Max. She asked to interrogate the prisoner, claiming he was linked to a case she was investigating. Max, "Fuck you, you American pig."
"Fuck you, you American,"
he spat. Graves furiously slapped him, then kept hitting, until Max rushed over to stop her. She then grabbed a stool, pressed it against the prisoner's forehead, and forcibly pried a false tooth from his mouth. It was empty inside. At that moment, Max burst in and swiftly lunged at Graves, but she knocked him down. By then, Graves had already bolted from the room. Max noticed the hollow denture and assumed Graves had taken the documents, so he immediately ordered his men to seal off the entire facility. Soon, Graves clashed with several agents who'd responded, taking them all down. She then seized another guard, forced open a door, and tied the handle with rope to block further pursuit. Graves quickly called her partner, asking for help tracking the kidnappers' exact location. After pinpointing their hideout, Graves set out to rescue her husband. The kidnappers had laid a trap beforehand, hoping to make her abandon the mission, but they'd miscalculated her prowess. Their trap posed no real threat. Graves wriggled free of the crisis with ease. What she didn't know, though, was that the husband she was risking everything to save was far from ordinary.